The year was 1919. Europe had already burned. The First World War was over, but the smell of death still lingered in the streets. Broken cities, shattered families, and among millions of dead bodies, the world believed that peace had finally arrived. But within that darkness, another war was being born. A war that very few people know about. A war that redrew the map of Europe. A war that decided who would rule the world in the years to come. And the most terrifying part? If the outcome of this war had been even slightly different, the world we live in today might have been completely different.
After the First World War ended, the old empires began to collapse. Germany had been defeated. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had fallen apart. A revolution had erupted in Russia. All of Europe was drowning in chaos. And in the middle of that chaos, after 123 years, one nation returned to the world map once again: Poland. But the problem was, its borders were not defined. Enemies surrounded it from every side. Germany hated its existence. Russia considered it their territory. And then, two powers stood face to face. On one side, the newly reborn Poland. On the other, Soviet Russia. But this was not just a battle for land. This was a war for the future of all Europe.
Tensions along the border began to rise. Small clashes slowly turned into major attacks. Then, suddenly, Poland launched an offensive toward Ukraine. Their army reached Kyiv. Europe was shocked. A newly reborn nation was directly challenging Soviet Russia. But this was only the beginning, because just days later, the Red Army struck back, and their response was like a storm.
The Soviet army kept advancing. Villages were burning. People were abandoning their homes and fleeing. Railway lines were collapsing. The Red Army had only one goal: to keep moving westward. With every victory, their confidence kept growing. They had started to believe that all of Europe would soon bow before them. And then, they began their march toward Poland's capital, Warsaw. If Warsaw had fallen, the history of Europe might have changed forever. France and United Kingdom were terrified. They feared that the communist revolution would spread across all of Europe. The world was watching. Would Poland survive? Or would Europe fall beneath the red flags?
August 1920. The Soviet army had reached the outskirts of Warsaw. Poland's army was weak, exhausted, and heavily outnumbered. The world believed it was all over. Newspapers were reporting that Warsaw had only a few days left. But at that very moment, Poland made one of the most dangerous gambles in history. Was the darkness of night. Polish soldiers were silently changing their positions. The Soviet army believed that Poland was retreating, but in reality, a trap had already been set. Then, morning came, and suddenly, Poland launched a massive counterattack. The Soviet army began to collapse. Communication lines were destroyed. Commanders disappeared. Soldiers started fleeing. The army that had marched out to conquer Europe was now fighting to save its own life.
history gave this event a name: the miracle on the Vistula. El milagro sobre el río Vistula. But this was more than just a miracle. It was a moment that changed the future of Europe forever.
Historians still wonder today, what would have happened if Warsaw had fallen? Imagine this. The Soviet army reaches Germany. The country was already filled with unrest. Perhaps a revolution would have erupted there? And then maybe all of Europe would have turned communist. Perhaps the World War II would never have happened the way we know it today. Perhaps Adolf Hitler would never have risen to power. Perhaps the modern world would have been completely different. A war that very few people know about had actually already decided the future of modern Europe. The Treaty of Riga was signed. The war was over. New borders were drawn. Poland became larger. Soviet Russia stepped back. The world breathed a sigh of relief. But that peace existed only on the surface. Deep inside, the hatred was still alive. Russia never forgot this defeat, and Poland continued to live in fear. Then came 1939. When Nazi Germany and Soviet Union invaded Poland together, people felt as if the War of 1920 had returned once again.